We're hopping back in time for the third and final port of a Williams arcade game by HAL. But Joust is kind of special. Joust is the game that caused all of these ports. Satoru Iwata wrote it to demonstrate that he could program for the Famicom, and Nintendo used it, as well as the other ports that HAL made of Atari games, to try to sell Atari on distributing the Famicom in the United States. Of course, Atari passed since they had their own game systems they were working on, and the rest is history. The arcade game Joust is one of my favorites of all time. And so that raises the immediate question, is Famicom Joust a reasonable port of the arcade? And the answer is, kinda. It does a lot right, gets a few things wrong, and the overall result is not bad. In Joust, you're a knight on an ostrich, and your goal is to defeat waves of enemies who are similarly riding around on ostriches. The ostrich can propel itself up into the air, but not particularly well. So every time you hit the A button, you flap your wings once. And you have to hit it repeatedly to carry yourself up into the air. When you and an enemy collide, whoever's lance is higher wins. If they're equal, you just bounce off. Otherwise, the loser is popped. For you, that means losing a life. For the enemies, that means being reduced to an egg. If you let the egg sit around for a while, it'll hatch into a soldier, and his ostrich comes out to pick him up. So what you need to do is run over and collect the eggs, or you can still get the enemy after they hatch, as long as they haven't gotten back on their bird. Both you and the enemy spawn in from these glowing panels on the ground, and one advantage that you have is that you spawn in before the enemies do. So you can position yourself to take advantage of how they're coming in. If you're defeated, you respawn at one of those glowing panels, and you're invincible until you move or flap. The game starts out with 4 platforms, plus the ground, and a covering for some lava. After a couple rounds, the lava covering burns away, and from that point on, if you fly too close to the lava, you could get snatched by a hand that tries to drag you down. You can still escape it by flapping a lot. Enemies can get caught by the hand as well, and that's a good opportunity to pick them off. As time passes, other platforms will vanish as well. Eventually, it gets to the point that just the ground is left. On later stages, after a little while, a pterodactyl appears. The pterodactyl will try to run you down, and it goes away if you get defeated. There is a way to defeat the pterodactyl, though. If you collide with it just right so that your lance hits the tip of its nose, then the pterodactyl is destroyed instead of you. Some of the stages are egg stages, where all of the enemies start out in the eggs rather than emerging from the glowing spots. It's not too difficult to collect all of the eggs before they hatch in those stages. Comparing Famicom Joust to the arcade version, your bird in Famicom Joust has a lot more momentum. It's tougher to reverse direction and respond to the enemy's movements. The other big difference, though, is that the enemy AI is a lot simpler. It's not nearly as aggressive about going after you as the arcade game is. This is actually a little bit of a problem because they have a bad tendency to fly up to the top of the screen and stay there. The US version of Joust for the NES revamped the graphics for the game, making them more in line with the arcade version. I guess being able to go back and revisit a 4-year-old game at that point has its advantages. Joust is a solid arcade port, but it's also something else. This is the last hurrah for the classic arcade game on the Famicom. Stargate, Millipede, and Joust were the style of games that the Famicom was built to be able to play. This is what the Famicom was in 1983 and 1984. It's not the end of score attack games, of course, but the genre is morphing into something else. We won't see that, however, until the late 1998.